They call it the ribbon of ink. Route 44. To most, it's just a stretch of asphalt connecting the sleepy towns of Massachusetts and Connecticut. A utility road. A way to get from point A to point B. But to those who drive it after the clock strikes 3, it is a graveyard that hasn't been buried yet. I've lived in New England my entire life. I grew up on stories of the Bridgewater Triangle, of strange lights in the sky and voices in the woods that sounded like family members who had been dead for decades. I never believed them. I thought they were tales told to keep children from wandering too far into the pines. I was a man of logic, a man of concrete facts. My name is David. I'm a technician. I spend my days and often my nights fixing the machines that keep our modern world running. 3 months ago, I was coming back from a late-night emergency repair near Seekonk. The air was thick and heavy, the kind of New England fog that feels like a wet wool blanket draped over your face. I decided to take the shortcut through Route 44. The GPS on my phone was flickering, the blue dot jumping sporadically across the screen as if it couldn't decide where I was. I didn't think much of it. Technology fails in the fog. It's a fact of life. But as I passed Anawan Rock, the atmosphere changed. The heater in my car was blasting at 80 degrees, yet I could see my own breath. A thin silver mist began to crawl along the dashboard. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the white line right where the shoulder of the road disappears into the black mud of the swamp. He was tall. He had a shock of matted, fiery red hair that seemed to catch the light of my high beams, even though the rest of him was a shadow. He wore a red flannel shirt, the colors faded and dirty, and heavy denim jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in 40 years. He didn't have his thumb out, he didn't wave. He just stood there, his arms hanging limp at his sides, watching my car approach with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I should have kept driving, I know that now. Every survival instinct I possessed, every ancient lizard brain warning of danger, was screaming at me to floor the accelerator. But there was a gravity to him, a pull. Against my own will, my foot moved to the brake. The tires crunched on the gravel as I pulled over. The passenger door didn't just open. It felt like it was pulled open by a vacuum. The man climbed in. He didn't sit down so much as he simply occupied the space. The smell hit me immediately. It wasn't the smell of a living man. It was the scent of a cellar after a flood. Damp earth, rotting leaves, and a metallic copper tang that reminded me of old blood. "Where to?" I asked. My voice sounded small, fragile. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead through the windshield, his eyes wide and unblinking. He raised a hand, the skin was so pale it was almost translucent, and pointed a single shaking finger down the road. "Just ahead," he rasped. His voice wasn't a voice. It was the sound of dry leaves being crushed under a heavy boot. We drove. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic thumping of the tires over the expansion joints in the road. Thump, thump, thump. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but I could feel his gaze. He wasn't looking at the road anymore. He was looking at me. I glanced at my side view mirror to check for traffic. My heart stopped. In the mirror, the passenger seat was empty. I could see the headrest. I could see the window behind it. But the man sitting 6 inches away from me, he had no reflection. I looked back at the seat. He was there. I could see the individual red hairs on his beard. I could see the way his chest moved with a wet, struggling breath. But the mirror showed nothing. My hands began to shake so violently I almost lost control of the wheel. Then he spoke again. But he didn't use words. He began to giggle. It started as a low, bubbling sound in his throat. Then it grew. It became a high-pitched, manic cackle that filled the entire cabin of the car. It wasn't the sound of a person who found something funny. It was the sound of something that had been waiting a very long time to be heard. Lassa. He turned his head. I heard the sound of bones snapping, a wet grinding noise as his neck rotated much further than it should have been able to. He looked at me, his eyes now entirely black and his mouth stretched into a grin that was far too wide for his face. "You're almost home, David," he whispered. I slammed on the brakes. The car fishtailed, the back end swinging out toward the trees. I didn't care if I crashed, I just needed him out. When the car finally skidded to a halt in the mud, I lunged for the passenger door and threw it open. The seat was empty. There were no footprints in the mud. There was no sound of a man running into the woods. There was only the smell of the damp earth and the fading echo of that hideous, giggling laugh drifting away in the fog. I spent the next week in a fever. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that red flannel shirt. I went to the Rehoboth Public Library. I dug through the microfiche until my eyes burned. And there I found him. Joseph Miller, a local man who had been walking home from a bar on Route 44. He had been hit by a driver who never stopped. The paper described him as a friendly man with a bushy red beard and a favorite red flannel shirt. But the paper didn't mention what I found on my floor mat the next morning. I found a rusted pocket knife. It was warm to the touch. And when I turned it over, the initials J.M. were freshly carved into the wood. I don't take shortcuts anymore. Because on Route 44, the dead don't just stay in the ground. They're still looking for a ride home. While the story of Joseph Miller on Route 44 is etched into local history, there are other mysteries that don't leave behind physical clues. They don't leave footprints in the mud or rusted knives on the floorboards. They exist in the air, in the invisible waves that surround us every second of every day. They are the frequencies of the forgotten. My name is Thomas. I'm what you might call a radio enthusiast. While most people my age are scrolling through social media or losing themselves in streaming services, I'm in my basement, scanning the shortwave bands. There is something hypnotic about the static. If you listen long enough, it stops being noise. It starts to sound like the universe breathing, like the collective hum of every thought ever conceived drifting through the ionosphere. But 3 years ago, I found a breath that wasn't supposed to be there. It was a Tuesday night around 2 in the morning. A heavy storm was rolling in, the kind that makes the power lines hum and the dog whine in his sleep. I was scanning the frequencies near the 7 megahertz range, looking for a weather broadcast when the static suddenly cut out. It didn't just fade, it was replaced by a silence so absolute it felt heavy. Then came the tone. A pure, cold, high-pitched sine wave that felt like it was drilling into the center of my skull. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical sensation. And then, the numbers started. It was a woman's voice. Monotone. Emotionless. Like a machine trying to remember what it felt like to be human. She spoke in English, but the cadence was all wrong. The pauses between the words were too long, as if she were reading from a list of things she didn't understand. 4. Pause. 4. Pause. 1. Pause. 2, she said. Then a long, agonizing silence. 0. 9, 8, 1. In the world of radio, these are known as number stations. Most are remnants of the Cold War, secret codes sent to spies in the field who have long since been forgotten. But this was different. This wasn't coming from a government transmitter in Russia or a military base in the UK. My signal strength meter was pinned to the max. Whatever was broadcasting this was close. It was practically in my backyard. I began to log the numbers. Every night at exactly 2 a.m., the broadcast would start. I filled 3 notebooks with her sequences. I became obsessed. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering my phone. I sat in the dark, bathed in the green glow of my receiver, waiting for her voice like a lover waiting for a secret. Sleep deprivation began to warp the edges of my reality. The basement, once my sanctuary for electronics and soldering, slowly transformed into a cold concrete cell. I would sit for hours staring at the dust motes dancing in the orange glow of the radio's vacuum tubes, convinced they were moving in patterns dictated by the woman's voice. My skin felt too tight, humming with the same 60-cycle vibration as the power lines outside my window. I started seeing her in the static. Not a face, but the suggestion of a silhouette flickering just behind the green waves on the oscilloscope. I stopped eating. The only thing that had any flavor was the metallic tang of the air near the receiver, heavy with the scent of hot lead and ozone. I became convinced that if I missed even one sequence of numbers, the world would somehow tilt off its axis. I was becoming a ghost in my own home, haunting a machine that was slowly, methodically eating my mind. The breakthrough happened on the 14th night. I was listening back to a recording of a previous broadcast, my headphones pressed so hard against my ears that they were bleeding. Underneath the woman's voice, I heard something, a background noise. At first I thought it was just signal bleed, but then I heard it clearly. A dog barking, and then a car door slamming. My blood ran cold. Those weren't just random sounds. I recognized that bark. It was Buster, the golden retriever from the house 3 doors down. And that car door. It had the distinct heavy thud of my neighbor's old Ford truck. The broadcast wasn't coming from a secret bunker in the desert. It was being recorded right here, in my neighborhood. Or maybe inside my house while I slept. I took a portable receiver and went outside. The air was freezing, but I didn't feel it. I felt like I was made of static myself. I followed the signal. The closer I got to the edge of the woods behind my property, the clearer the voice became. It was so loud now that it was vibrating through the plastic casing of the radio in my hand. I found the source near an old abandoned drainage pipe. Tucked into the hollow of an ancient oak tree was a small black box. It had no brand name, no serial number, just a single long antenna and a small spinning tape reel that moved with a hypnotic clicking sound. I reached for it, my hand trembling so hard I could barely extend my fingers. I intended to smash it. I wanted the silence back. But as my hand closed around the cold metal, the voice changed. It wasn't the woman anymore. It was my voice. On the recording, I heard myself speaking. But I wasn't saying numbers. I was crying. I was begging for someone to turn it off. I heard the sound of my own footsteps running through the leaves, the exact crunching sound I was making in that very moment. It was a perfect, real-time reflection of my own terror. He's at the tree now. My own voice whispered through the speaker. He's reaching for the box. He's going to see the date. He's going to understand that the signal isn't a broadcast. It's a countdown. I looked at the small screen on the box. It wasn't showing frequencies anymore. It was a digital timer, the red numbers bleeding into the dark of the forest floor. 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 5, 15 seconds. I didn't wait to see what happened when it hit 0. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my house. I locked the doors, I pulled the curtains, I stayed in the middle of the floor with a kitchen knife until the sun came up, listening to the silence of my house, which now felt like a predator waiting to strike. The next morning I went back to the tree. The box was gone. There was no sign that anyone had been there, no footprints, no bent branches, no crushed leaves. It was as if the earth itself had opened up and swallowed the evidence of my own voice. I sold my equipment that afternoon. I moved to a different city, a place with more noise, more people, more distractions. I don't listen to the radio anymore. I've destroyed every receiver I owned. But sometimes, when the room is very quiet, or when I'm standing in a crowded subway station, I hear a faint metallic hiss in my ear, and a woman's voice far away, as if calling from across an ocean of static, whispers 4 numbers, my birth year, and today's date. It seems the countdown didn't stop at the tree, it just reset, and I'm still waiting for it to hit 0. Was this the truth? Or was it a nightmare I built in the dark to distract myself from a lonely life? You decide. But tell me, Have you checked your radio lately? Sarah and the Yellow Raincoat. We've traveled down the ghost lights of Route 44, and we've stood in the cold basement of a man lost to the airwaves. But before we reveal which of these nightmares was built on a lie, I have one more tape for you. This one isn't a legend. It isn't a mystery from the 1970s. This happened only 2 years ago in a quiet suburb of Oregon. And unlike the others, this one left a physical mark. Her name was Sarah. She lived alone in a small cottage at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was the kind of neighborhood where people didn't lock their doors until the sun went down. Sarah was a night owl, a freelance writer who found the silence of the early hours perfect for her work. But in the autumn of 2024, the silence began to feel predatory. It started on a Monday night. A torrential rainstorm was lashing against her windows. Sarah was in her kitchen making coffee when she happened to glance out the window. At the very edge of her driveway, just barely visible in the orange glow of the street lamp, stood a man. He was tall. He wore a bright yellow fisherman's raincoat, the hood pulled low over his face. He wasn't moving. He wasn't looking at his phone or waiting for a ride. He was simply standing there, staring directly at her front door. Sarah felt that cold prickle of unease, but she dismissed it. Maybe he was a neighbor whose car had broken down. Maybe he was waiting for a dog to finish its business. She finished her coffee and went to bed. But the next night it happened again. At 2:15 a.m. she looked out. He was there, same yellow coat, same unmoving posture, but this time he was 5 feet closer. He was standing on her lawn now, his boots sinking into the wet grass. Sarah called the police. By the time they arrived, the man was gone. They found no footprints. The rain had washed the world clean. They told her it was likely a prank or a local vagrant and advised her to keep her doors locked. On the third night, Sarah didn't look out the window. She was too afraid. She stayed in her bedroom with the lights off, her heart hammering against her ribs. But around 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. It was an alert from her doorbell camera. She opened the app, her hands shaking. The grainy night vision footage showed the porch. It was empty. She was about to close the app when she saw it. A hand, a pale, wet hand, reached into the frame from the side. It didn't ring the bell. It didn't try the handle. It simply pressed a single, muddy finger against the camera lens, blurring the image into a smear of brown and gray. Sarah didn't scream. She couldn't. Her throat had closed up with pure, visceral terror. She realized the man wasn't outside anymore. The angle of the hand, it was coming from the side of the porch where the crawl space hatch was located. She stayed in her room, clutching a kitchen knife until the sun began to bleed through the curtains. When the police returned the next morning, they did a full sweep of the property. They found the crawl space hatch was unlocked. Beneath the house, in the damp, dark dirt directly under Sarah's bedroom, they found a small, hollowed-out nest. There was a sleeping bag. There were several empty water bottles, and there was a small, battery-operated Polaroid camera. When they developed the film found inside, Sarah fainted. There were dozens of photos. All of them were of her. Some were taken through the windows, but the last three were taken from inside her own hallway while she slept. The man in the yellow raincoat hadn't just been standing in her driveway. He had been living under her feet for weeks. The police didn't just find photos. They found a life being lived in parallel to Sarah's, separated only by a few inches of wood and insulation. They found a small handheld radio tuned to a dead frequency that had been modified to act as a crude listening device, pointed directly upward toward her bed. There were dozens of small, discarded candy wrappers and a collection of trinkets that Sarah had thought she'd simply lost over the months. A stray earring, a hair tie, a spare key she was sure she had misplaced in the garden. The most chilling discovery, however, was the schedule. Taped to one of the floor joists was a handwritten log. It didn't just track when Sarah left for groceries or when she turned off her lights. It tracked her sleep cycles. It noted the nights she tossed and turned, the nights she talked in her sleep, and the exact minute her breathing deepened into REM sleep. The man in the yellow raincoat hadn't just been watching her from the driveway. He had been a silent, unseen passenger in her most private moments, counting her breaths while she dreamed of safety. Even now, years later, Sarah can't step onto a wooden floor without wondering if someone beneath her is listening to the vibration of her footsteps. Sarah moved out that day. She never went back. The man was never caught. The only thing the police found left behind in the crawl space was a small note scribbled on the back of one of the photos. It said, "The yellow makes it easier for you to see me, but I don't need the light to see you. Now, the moment of truth. Tonight I shared 3 stories with you. The phantom hitchhiker of Route 44, the mysterious numbers stationed in the woods, and the watcher in the yellow raincoat. 2 of these are based on documented chilling reality. One of them was a lie, a fiction woven from the shadows of my own mind. Did you spot it? The story of Thomas and the number station was the lie. While number stations are real, the tale of the countdown box in the woods was a fiction designed to test your skepticism. But the red-headed hitchhiker? That is a legendary encounter reported by hundreds of drivers on Route 44 for over 50 years. And Sarah? Sarah is a real woman, and her story is a terrifying reminder that the monsters we should fear most don't have glowing eyes or spectral forms. They have muddy boots and yellow raincoats. Thank you for spending this time in the vault. If you enjoyed these tapes, consider subscribing and hitting the bell. It helps us keep the lights off and the stories flowing. Tell me in the comments, did I fool you? Or did you know the radio was a fake from the start? I'll be down there reading your theories in the dark. Sleep well if you can. This has been Somnia Vault. Good night.